our biscuit and tea break for those of us who followed the rules for the event and just had biscuits and tea. That's all anyone's allowed now until the end of day tomorrow, biscuits and tea. Really great session coming up now on using project management to be a better communicator and instructional designer. So I will shut up and get off the screen and hand over to Laura. Laura, it's all yours.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Hoyer, and I'm going to be doing a quick presentation today on project management and how it helps you become a better communicator and instructional designer. First, just a little bit about me. I am a school teacher. I used to teach middle school English. So any of you former educators out there totally understand that background and all of the baggage that comes with that. For the last 5 years, I've been in instructional design, and I've recently been promoted to team lead. Also on the side, I do resume writing and coaching. So you'll see like the Right Fit Career Coach throughout my my slides and things, but I do that in addition to instructional design. And I've also, you've heard from Heidi Kirby. I've been working with her to work on instructional design coaching and things like that on the side too. So more to come in that space. So first, I'd love to hear from you all in the chat. How long have you been an instructional designer? Go ahead and type your answer in the chat. And Tom, if you could give me just a couple of general ideas of responses, that'll be wonderful.
Certainly will. We'll just wait for them to come through. There's usually a little bit of a lag. Just waiting for the first person who says too long. That's the default response, isn't it? There we go. Jonathan Hill coming in with too long.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, we've got 30 years. We've got 9 years. Wow. We've got Natasha, who is aspiring to the role. Excellent. Jeremy, 2 years. Mediha, 3 years. Joseph Suarez, welcome to the group. 14 years.
Wow.
8 years. Real variety.
That's fantastic. Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of what I wanted to get from this question. So that's really insightful. And I'd love to hear from the people who have been doing it 30 years, just on the side in general, like how it's changed over those 30 years, because I know it's really blown up in the last even 5 years. So I'm going to ask you one more question before we get into it. But for those of you who are just starting out, or even people who have been in it 10 plus years, do you typically manage your own projects, or do you work with a project manager for most projects? And go ahead and use the chat again. And Tom, if you could just give me a quick overview again, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So I think Terry, from the perspective of being in it a long time, he's come up with just from PowerPoint to storyline. That's a big jump,
That's fair.
Right? We'll just wait for some more responses in. We've got Jonathan, who's a lone stranger, and Joseph, mostly no PM, bit of both from Mohammed there, so a bit of a mixed experience.
Mm-hmm.
Phil, hey Phil, PM for some aspects. We've got, coming in too quick now. Morgan does a bit of both. We've got working with team, but mostly we'll have a manager tend to do both the ID and the wider PM role. Mixed. Yep, so a real mixed bag from everyone there.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for giving me your responses. That's really helpful. That's also been my experience as well, where some projects I work with a project manager and other ones I act as the project manager. That seems to be kind of common in those responses. So even if you work with a project manager on some projects or all projects, it's really helpful for you to be able to set up your project plan for your projects to help you make the most of your time. And it helps you communicate better with your SME'S and stakeholders. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But for those of you who are newer to instructional design or aspiring to be an instructional designer, project management, at least in my brain, this is how I keep it straight, it's basically a very fancy to-do list that can be shared with everyone involved in the project, so that way they know when things are happening, what's happening next, in what order, all of that. It is important to note that the things that I'll be talking about today have worked well for me, and I'm very much a list person, but there are some aren't necessarily list people and they need a more visual tool. And a lot of project management tools will adapt to that, and there are lots of options out there. I'll be talking about SmartSheet today, which is my favorite tool to use. Another reason I love SmartSheet is because there are views that you can change, and we'll get into that. But it's important to choose a tool that works best for you and how you work. And you can also ask around at your organization about subscriptions and licenses that employees are already using. So one team might be using SmartSheet already, somebody else might be using Trello or Monday or another tool. So ask around and see what tools are being used and play around with them so that you figure out what works best for you. All right, so we're gonna get right into it. I'm gonna give you the steps for creating a project management plan for your project, and then we'll go from there. It looks like my one image didn't show up, but that's okay. The main one off to the left will work here. So the first step to creating a very successful project management plan is to list everything that needs to be accomplished by you and by SME'S or stakeholders. So if you take a look at this image down here, you'll see that there are things on here that the instructional designer might do for things like conduct a needs analysis and review a project request form. But other things like identifying SME'S, that would fall to the stakeholder. And then you'll see as we go through that there are things like SME review and then uploading to the LMS. You would list those things even if you're not the one technically doing them. You plan for them. So think as you're building this list, think about what needs to be built, designed, reviewed, edited, uploaded, all of it in order for the project to be considered complete. And like I said before, even if you have a project manager, this is still very helpful to share with the entire project team so that they understand from a training standpoint what needs to be accomplished in order for this initiative to be successful. So first step, make a very detailed to-do list. Then you're going to assign due dates. So start with the last task that needs to be accomplished at the absolute latest that it can be completed. So in this little image I included here, this isn't the full plan, but you can see up here that I listed the due date for the entire project as 12/21. So then at the very end of the list, which we didn't get to down here because it's a long list, but at the very end of the list should be that date. Then work backwards from there. Okay, in order for everything to be ready to go by 12/21, what needs to be done before that, and back up all the way up with due dates. And again, it's not the time frame which you would like to complete it, but the absolute drop dead due date. Start there. And if you're new to IDEA, I just want to call out that training due dates are earlier than launch dates, because a product or something somebody needs to be trained on might be launching on the 31st, for example, but training may need to start on the 21st. So obviously that impacts your deadlines and due dates. So keep that in mind as you build, and make sure to ask those questions in the very early phases of the project. So that way you know what your absolute drop dead date is, and you can work backwards from there. Then I recommend going back and assigning start dates. So you have those drop dead every every task on your list, but now you need to denote when you plan on starting each of those things. And the start date might be the same day, or it could be a couple days before, depending on the task itself and how much time it requires of you to create that. So one key way here to make yourself or to help yourself become a better ID is to maximize your time by looking for opportunities to work on other deliverables while one deliverable is out for review. So I gave a little example down here where if the first deliverable is a course, and the course is being designed starting December 7th and it's due on the 10th, it goes out for review on the 10th and it's due back from the SME by the 13th, then you can plan on starting to work on your second deliverable during that time frame. So if this is due on the 20th, great, but I know that looking at start dates and when I plan on sending things out for review, that I have the ability here to say, okay, while that's up for review, I'll start on the job aid, and so on and so forth. And again, if you're just starting out to instructional design, give yourself more time than you think you need. I usually, just as a general rule of thumb, as long as you can, I know deadlines aren't always very forgiving or long, really. So give yourself an extra day if you can, especially when it comes to designing and developing things, because you might run into tech problems, or you might not have enough content. There are always things that come up that might get in the way. So give yourself more time than you think that you need. And I'm sure the seasoned instructional designers in the room would agree with that as well. All right, then you're going to back in and assign SME'S. And you can assign a SME or a subject matter expert, or you can think of this as assigning a responsible party. So make it easy for everyone looking at this document to know who is responsible for which items and when those specific tasks are due. So for example, on the last slide, I showed you this course, and I showed you it would be out for SME review on the 10th, due back on the 13th, and I would tag that person, and in SmartSheet you can do this, but you can tag that person, SME number 1, so that they can see when looking at this that like on the 10th, they should expect to get this document or course for review, and that it's due back on the 13th, and I'll be the one reviewing it, and I'll be the one contacting them about it. If you're working with more than one SME, this is incredibly helpful because it will help you keep straight who is going to review which materials for you. And also if certain SMEs are, let's say, just going on vacation or something, that would limit their ability to review something, you know in your project from the very beginning who to send that to at that time. All right. Now these are just, that was the basics. Now these are some additional suggestions and tips. And obviously some of these will vary depending on the tool that you use to build your project plan. But these are some additional things to consider. One thing that's really helped me over time, especially when sharing documents with people, is to find a way to attach development materials to rows associated with that task for easy access. I'm one of those people where I have 100 tabs open in a window at any given time because I'm afraid that if I close the tab, I'll lose the resource. But if you attach it to rows or you attach it to the file that you're using, you can easily access it specifically for those tasks. And these can be documents like an SOP, a standard operating procedure. It could be a workflow and Lucid chart. It could be a bunch of different types of documents, but find a way to make it easy on yourself and others to see what you're using to build those training materials. Another recommendation that's actually worked well for me, and I highly recommend this for people who are just starting out in instructional design, but we talked about start date and end date. I recommend adding another column for like an actual completed date. Things change all of the time. So especially as you're starting out and you're starting to get a feel for how long things take you to build and create and design, it's helpful for you to start tracking when things actually come through. And on top of that, if you're getting reviews from subject matter experts and feedback from them and they're not getting it to you on time, it's a great way for you to not only track that, but then go back to your stakeholder and say that I really enjoyed or did not enjoy working with this subject matter expert. These are some issues that came up, and to troubleshoot that way. Now in SmartSheet specifically, you can, and I'll show you in a second, but you can switch between a Gantt view or calendar view, so that you can see what is due on every day. Or a Gantt view, you can see when things are starting and ending, what is overlapping. But again, what works best for you? I prefer just the list view, but for some other people, a Gantt view is much more helpful. Also consider, especially when you start working with subject matter experts, or if you haven't worked with them before, put together a really short video showing them the basics of how you typically set up your project plans and how they can make it work for them. So for example, I'll show you in a minute in my SmartSheet, but if there is a very long project plan, there are a lot of tasks that need to be completed, it can be easy for a subject matter expert to not know what all applies to them. So you can show them how to filter by their name or how to filter things by a date. And you can also show them, depending on the tool, how to set up email notifications. So that way, if something assigned to them changes, or you can have them set up reminders a couple days before something is due. But there are multiple ways that you can use all of these different tools to get your subject matter experts in on the ground floor, if you will, understanding what they need to do and the expectations for them from the beginning. You also, I highly recommend updating your project plan daily, even if nothing's changed. So for example, if I'm developing for 3 days, even though I'm still developing, it's helpful to just go in and double check, is everything on time? Has anything been pushed back? Has anything been changed? Is anything completed? Just so that way you know exactly where you are in your development process, which makes you a much more effective instructional designer in the end. Now, of course, I'll show you the thing in a second, but my image isn't showing up here. Let me just share my screen anyway. So this is SmartSheet, and this is the form that I was showing. I have a couple of extra things in here, like a development status column. I have an on-time status column, but this is what those screenshots came from. So I started obviously with the task column, then added in a due date, then put in start dates, and I'm going to scroll down. You can see that there are lots of items to be completed on here. And in this case, I had 2 SME'S. There's also an on-time status column and then comments in general about that piece. So for a subject matter expert, it's helpful for them to be able to, for example, filter by their name. So let's say I'm SME number 1, and I want to filter by just me. I hit apply. Now I can see every task that's assigned to me, when I need to start reviewing them, and when it's due. And as an instructional designer, the sooner you can create this project plan and share it with your subject matter experts and stakeholders, the sooner they can see when they can expect things to be sent to them for review. I say this a lot, but a lot of the times we tend to forget that while instructional design may be our full-time job, it's not everybody else's. So the sooner you can communicate with them that on these dates you're going to need them to review, the sooner they can block off calendars, set reminders. You can also remind them ahead of time, like, hey, on Thursday, I'm going to be sending you something. I'm going to need it back by Friday. I know that's a quick turnaround time, but just letting them know up front what to expect and when to expect it. And then it also makes you a better communicator, because if things change, let me remove this filter really quick. So if things change, let's say this deliverable is taking longer than anticipated, and that affects all of the other dates to come after it, then I can communicate as soon as I know. For example, if it's the 7th, and I'm thinking this is going to take way longer than anticipated, then I can communicate with my subject matter experts that all of the other dates have changed. Please go back in and double check the project plan, know what's going on and when to expect those things from me and when I expect them back. It also makes it easier for you to say if changes are happening, like scope creep or scope, like the sequence is changing, or they're requesting new deliverables or anything like that. You can come back and say, okay, I can do that, but it'll affect the dates of the other deliverables we've already agreed to. Or you can say that that's not possible because, and then point them back to this project plan. So let me go back to this really quickly. So again, just really quickly, how does project management make you a better communicator and ID? Communicate expectations for feedback early, so that SMEs can put reminders in their calendars or block off time for reviewing materials ahead of time. Before you even start building anything, they know when they can expect to do those things. It also helps you communicate the impacts of delays, like I just mentioned. Scope creep, deadlines are pushed, but having certain due dates defined for each item gives you a visual to point to when describing the impact of those changes. And since it was defined very early on and hopefully shared with them in the very beginning of the project, they can see that it obviously throws some things off if there are changes to be made later on. And it also helps you streamline your own process. You can start to gather data on how long each type of deliverable takes you to better inform your design later on, or your practice in general. I do have a template that Tom is so graciously going to share with you. Basically, that template that I just shared with you I put into an Excel so that way everybody can access it. And you can use that to, you could take bits and pieces from it, include it, not include it, make it work for you. But it also includes things to think about, like when building a course, you have to account for time, like not only SME reviews, but a second review, and uploading it to the LMS when you expect to do those things. So streamline your process and then communicate better with the entire project team to have a better experience overall. All right, so like I said, that project management tracker template that I've shown, Tom is going to share. But if you want to connect with me, you can connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat. I love talking all things ID. And yeah, I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you very much. And we do have some questions. So first things first, Linda, I think early on kind of said, and what happens when the SME doesn't get back to you on the date you wanted?
Oh, what a great question. And unfortunately, yes, this does happen, but that allows you to go back to your stakeholder because they're the one who has, again, the stake in the project. You come back to them and you say, okay, my subject matter expert was set to review things on these dates. I haven't been able to get in contact with them. They haven't reviewed things for me. That's going to impact the rest of the project in these ways. So that way, from very early on, the second you realize that's not happening, you can really clearly communicate the effect of that. And your stakeholder might assign you a different SME.
Awesome. So we've got that one. There was one that went over to a completely different place. Bear with me 1 second, because it didn't come into this chat. It went over there. So we got a question. Do you track times for tasks? So I'm not sure whether this was specifically about your approach or the piece of software.
So I don't personally, but it can be done that way. So for example, if like I mentioned, if I'm saying like a course development typically takes me 3 days, that's something that I've figured out over time, and part of that has come from project management. But I know that in certain environments, especially contractors, it might be different tracking your time, like how many hours you typically work on something. I personally have experience with that, so I'm sorry I can't better answer your question. But you can use project management to do those things for sure.
Brilliant.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, I think that works well. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. Oh, actually, I think this is one. Sonia asks, typically use whatever tool the project stakeholders are most comfortable with for the project. If stakeholders don't have their own tool or system in place, do you ask them to create accounts with a tool like SmartSheet?
Oh, what a great question. I would recommend first exploring tools that may not require them to make an account, or if it does require somebody to make an account, that it would be free for them to just view it. I believe SmartSheet does that, where there's an option to just share it with somebody. They may need a SmartSheet account to just view it, but I believe that's one of the free options. But yes, there are definitely tools out there aside from SmartSheet that you would be able to share something with somebody who doesn't technically have an account. Obviously, that requires more researching on your end to find those tools. But you're absolutely right. There are some limitations occasionally when not everybody has access to the tool that you would like to use. I will say too that I know within SmartSheet, you can export things to Excel or you can export them to a PDF, but that makes it a little bit more challenging for you because as you go through and update dates or start dates, end dates, you would have to share it again, but it is still an option should you be completely sold on working with a specific tool. There may be options to get around that, but just keep in mind it may require you to do 1 or 2 more steps.
Awesome.
That was a great question.
So, if there are any other questions, now's the time. Get them into the chat.
Awesome.
Oh, that has been a question gone to another area. Tell you what, let me copy it into here and then put it up. So we've got in the template, there is a tab that has all the comments presented. Can that be done automatically, or was that manually done?
That was automatically. So I can actually share my screen really
Magic.
quick. So within SmartSheet, you do have the option. This is where I attach files for the project. Like I said, that can be a lucid chart or an SOP or something that may be helpful for the project overall. But I did put comments in here in general about like things to include or think about with like things like project kickoff. I just made a little comment. But when I exported this to Excel, so export to Microsoft Excel, it automatically put those comments in a separate tab. But I know that in Excel, it does make it just a little bit of a pain in the butt because it says like what row it's assigned to, that comment. So you have to kind of switch back and forth with the sheets themselves. But that was done automatically, which was nice for me.
Awesome. Anyone for any more? You don't have to, but it's nice to ask.
Yeah. But thank you for these great questions. They've been awesome. And like I said, I'd love to hear more from the people who have been doing this for a while, what's worked for them, their project management style. I know I mentioned before that you may have a project manager assigned to your project, but even if you do, it's kind of useful for you to be able to, at least for the training portion of it, articulate exactly everything that needs to be done on your end and even share that with the project manager. So I'd love to hear from the people who've been doing this for a while if there's something specific they would also recommend. I'd love to hear that.
One SmartSheet specific question that's come through actually. Does it have a Gantt option?
It does, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. I meant to show that. Yes, it does. There are a couple views, and the view that I shared is the grid view. But in let me see if I can share my screen one more time.
It was nice to see someone else get as excited about a Gantt chart as I get when there is one in place on a project. It's
yeah, and there is within SmartSheet too. When you create a new one, you can choose one that has a side-by-side Gantt chart, and let me show you really quick. Gantt chart and task list. So that is an option, but there's also, let me just go back really quick. Up here with this grid view, that's the view that I prefer because like I said, I'm very list oriented, but you can change it to a Gantt view. Or you can change it to a card view like this, which is similar to Trello, where you kind of drag things from yellow to green and so on and so forth. And there's also calendar view, which is super helpful in seeing like what all is due on which dates.
That's awesome.
So I'm so glad you asked that. I totally meant to share that. I totally forgot. But yes, and then there are other tools out there too that you can change your preferences in viewing options. Yet another reason why I love SmartSheet. Maybe they'll sponsor me. Do you think?
That would be unusual off the back of a video involving me. Usually our kind of thing is not sponsored by and never sponsored by.
Yeah.
But there we go.
No.
Super stuff. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And we had a nice conversation about Gantt charts. That's always a good day. I like that. Thank you so much for that. I think there's loads for us to all take away. Our next session is, I want to say it's at 3 o'clock, but I've not got the thing. It's at 3 o'clock, and it's Inclusive Image Selection 101, which is going to be a really, really interesting session, I think. So thank you all. It's time to jump into the networking sessions or one of the general chat places, and we shall see you in 15 minutes.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you guys for your great questions. I'll see you all later.